My guest today is Amir Emadi, a spokesperson of the Organization of the Iranian-American Communities Western Region. He has a MBA in Global Management. He received his undergraduate degree in International Security and Conflict Resolution. Amir Emadi uses these tools to advise policymakers on security issues within the Middle East, namely human rights violations, political violence, and nuclear non-proliferation. Amir's father, Ashghar Emadi, was one of the 52 murdered by the Iraqi forces on September 1st, 2013 in Camp Ashraf. The Iraqis recently issued a statement admitting to burying their bodies but not disclosing the time or the burial ground. Amir found the time out of his busy schedule last week to talk to me about the U.S. nuclear talks with the Iranian regime. Amir, if it's okay to call you Amir.
That's perfectly fine, yes.
Last month, a symposium of the Iranian communities in California was held. I'd like you to tell us about this symposium, who organized it, and what was the theme of the gathering.
Sure. A few weeks ago, it was on February 22nd, actually. We had a symposium in Los Angeles about the United States' nuclear talks with Iran. It's a hot topic nowadays.
Right.
The event was hosted by a member of the Organization of Iranian-American Communities. This is a member organization of this organization.
Okay.
And it's called the California Society for Democracy in Iran. And we had a great panel of political and military dignitaries speaking that included the commander of the Joint Interagency Task Force, Lieutenant Colonel Leo McCloskey. We had former Secretary of Homeland Security Tom Ridge. We had former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich.
Wow.
That's the House of Representatives in the U.S. And former Chairman of the DNC, the Democratic National Congress, Ed Rendell. And Patrick Kennedy, who was a former congressman. In fact, members of the Iranian-American community also spoke. They represented Iranian youth, professionals, scholars, doctors, women, and even victims of both in Iran and Camps Ashraf and Liberty, Iraq.
Amir, can you tell us how important is this, such an event to be held when there are talks of negotiating with the Iranian regime? Why do you think it's important to hold such an event?
Well, you know, there was two reasons why we had this symposium. One was to show the local Iranians that American politicians on both sides of the aisle support the Iranian diaspora and the Iranian people, not the Iranian regime. Every speaker was against the Iranian regime. And the second was, you know, we wanted to start a discussion about Iran's human rights violations. It's something that people are starting to overlook with all these talks in Iran on the nuclear negotiations. But we wanted to start a talk on the human rights violations. We wanted to start a talk on the Iranian opposition and the different kinds of challenges and opportunities that the U.S. faces in these nuclear talks with Iran. And this event was to show a harmony between Americans and Iranians facing an ironically existential threat, you know, and simply we just wanted to say to Iranians that they're not alone. You know, the media showed how millions of Iranians around the world stood up in support of their friends and relatives in the 2009 uprisings. But what the media doesn't always show is the perpetuity in that support. The Obama administration failed to address the injustices then in Iran and tried to reconcile that mistake by supporting the people in Libya and Egypt and Tunisia and all the other countries that took part in the Arab Spring. But we wanted to show in this symposium that the Iranian people do have support to change this theocracy to a democratic republic.
Amir, the presence of the prominent guests, actually, that you mentioned their names, it was, for me, it was very notable, especially Mr. Newt Gingrich. He was the candidate for U.S. presidency. I'm just curious, the people who attended this event and spoke at this event, what will they gain talking against Obama's policies in regards to the Iranian regime? But before you answer that, Amir, could you tell us, please, what Obama's view has been on the Iranian regime since he took office?
You know, President Obama has, since he's taken administration, he's had, what do they call it? He said he extended an open hand. So since President Obama has started in his administration, has taken office, he extended an open hand to the mullahs, and they basically punched them back with bloody fists. Right. And President Obama came into office with one goal in mind: talking his way through everything. And that may have worked in law school, but he never had to argue with people willing to kill and die. And I'm talking about the Iranian regime, Revolutionary Guards, the Quds Force. So, you know, his take with Iran is it's with that same policy of, hey, I want to talk with you, I want to open up talks with you, and that's basically his perspective, and it has been his perspective. I believe, and this may be a stretch to say, I believe that Obama thinks if he succeeds in changing, the new Iranian president Rouhani, that he's one, become the first Western president to do so and maybe get another Nobel Peace Prize. Two, he wants to prove that the regime and similar powers can be negotiated with. And that second reason is a dangerous notion. First off, Rouhani is not the man in charge, and never was, and none of the other front-facing so-called leaders ever were. Khamenei and the Ayatollahs at the top are in charge. They choose who represents the Islamic Republic to the world, and the Islamic Republic will go back and forth from moderate to hardliner, like from Khatami to Ahmadinejad and back to what's considered a moderate Rouhani. It's basically to keep the West confused while the Islamic Republic continues to fund terrorism around the world, oppress its own people, and keep people like me and you out of our homeland. Right. And that's basically the approach that Obama's been taking is, I want to talk to these people. Well, that's kind of crazy.
And what people like Newt Gingrich and Kennedy would gain against Obama's policy?
In terms of...
because I know it's not easy to talk against your government or your country. It's very hard.
It is very difficult, and every single speaker who spoke at the symposium started off by saying that we love our country and we support it, and we believe in the values that our forefathers fought for, etc. But when you have to fight for injustice, you take the side of humanity, and the supporters, the people who support this idea of you can't negotiate with terrorists, with Iran, the world's leading terrorist state. What they have to gain is their own moral responsibility. They feel for the people inside Iran who are being persecuted, who are being oppressed by their own regime. All the while, they see this fake, quote-unquote, moderate who's actually touted about or bragged about duping the West before with nuclear negotiations, and now he's coming out to speak. So, these American speakers at the symposium see the reality. They don't see a fruitful negotiation taking place, but they see people in Iran continue to be oppressed and the West continue to be duped, as it has been since the entire existence of this regime. The United States has provided concession after concession after concession to Iran, and even this negotiation right now is one-sided to the extent that the United States has opened up billions of dollars for the Iranian economy, and Iran, the Islamic Republic, hasn't really given anything back. We've lifted sanctions, but what has Iran done? "Quote unquote," halted its nuclear facility or nuclear enrichments and stuff. But, do we really know that?
And can we trust them? That's
exactly
the more important question.
Right, and that's what the speakers are saying is we can't trust the Iranian regime. They've duped us before, and they'll dupe us again, because especially now as the United States is in la-la land about, we have them in talks with us now, about opening up. And Rouhani himself, again, has stated that he's proud about duping the West before in nuclear negotiations. And now that the U.S. is in la-la land about Iran opening up, Rouhani has all the cards. But, some kids have to touch the fire a couple times to learn that it's hot. And Obama's hand that he extended in good faith to the world's terrorists will burn.
As you said, the violations of human rights in Iran have been overshadowed by the Iranian regime's nuclear program. In your opinion, what impact halting the nuclear program would have on human rights situation in Iran? And if the West can persuade the mullahs to halt this nuclear program completely, which I doubt, what does it mean for the Iranian people inside Iran?
Well, your first question, what impact would these nuclear negotiations or halting them have on having the situation in Iran? None, especially with the human rights. Iran will continue to falsely imprison people, sentence people to cruel punishments for strange crimes such as being a Christian pastor or being an ethnic minority. This question assumes that nuclear talks have hope, and they don't. Executions in Iran are over 500 now, and it hasn't even been a year since this so-called moderate Rouhani came to power. An article came out a few days ago that Iranian courts ordered the gouging of some innocent soul's eyes as a form of punishment. And I think it was yesterday I read an article or saw a little clip of Netanyahu publicly announcing that his people intercepted missiles from Iran to help fuel more conflict in that region. So no, nothing's going to change inside Iran by trying to talk with them. What's going to change is the United States and the West supporting the Iranian opposition, helping the Iranian opposition, which has already been proved to be a threat to the Iranian regime by providing intel to its enemies. It was the entity that brought Iran's secret nuclear facilities to light and saved U.S. military lives by providing intel on Iran's meddling in Iraq. I'm talking about the IEDs that Iran had sent to insurgents. But helping the Iranian opposition.
What kind of help are we talking about, Amir?
The first thing that we need to do is, in terms of the United States, is fulfill our promises. There's Iranian dissidents who had made a home out of a place that they had sought refuge, and that's Camp Ashraf in Camp Ashraf, Iraq. The United States had promised time and time again these people had given up their means of protection in exchange for promises that they would be protected, empty promises. Because these people have been attacked, the residents have been killed. There's two issues. One, other free countries, like in the West, are reluctant to take any of these residents in. And these residents had consolidated into Camp Ashraf and then relocated to a former U.S. military camp, which had been ransacked by the time the Ashrafis, we call them Ashrafis, are the residents of former Camp Ashraf. Before they even made it to Camp Liberty, that place had been ransacked and torn to pieces. They didn't have anything there. The Ashrafis had to make it themselves. And all this movement was under the promise that each resident would be protected by the United States under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Each one of those residents had an ID card. They're asylum seekers. But through the course of consolidating into Camp Ashraf and relocating into Camp Liberty, they had been attacked by Iraqi forces and Iranian Quds forces. They've been killed on several occasions in Camp Ashraf and in Camp Liberty. And now that they're all in Camp Liberty, and this is one of the topics that the speakers at the symposium discussed, we need to get them out. They are innocent civilians who are asylum seekers under international law, and they had protected person's ID cards. My father had a protected person's ID card before he was killed. He was an asylum seeker. What does that even mean anymore? So the first thing that they need to do is get these people safe, get them to a Western country, a free country to be safe, and then support the Iranian opposition, namely the Mujahideen Khaq, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. Why do I say this? And yes, I am a supporter. Why do I say this? Is because this is the only organization that has a platform for change in Iran. It has a political entrepreneur, Maryam Rajavi, who can lead, who can help people create the change that they want in their country and lead them to that change, that provides universal suffrage, that provides a democratic, a referendum for people to be able to vote. Equality for everyone, no discrimination against religion, separation of church and state, a democratic, non-nuclear republic in Iran. That is the Iranian opposition. In my family alone in Iran, there's dozens who are supporters of this organization. And they know many people who are sympathizers and supporters inside Iran as well. But because Iran is so oppressive of the people in there, in the country, it's hard to get them to rise up. Right. For the U.S. to support the Iranian opposition will show these people that you have support. You want to rise up, the Persian summer and the Arab Spring. You want to rise up, you will have our support, and that's what they need to do.
Amir, one of the speakers was Lieutenant Colonel Leo McCloskey. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
Yeah.
He was the last U.S. commander in charge of protecting Iranian residents at Camp Ashraf in Iraq. He was actually talking about how U.S. is not able to protect the now Camp Liberty residents in that country, and they should be transferred to U.S. There hasn't been actually a lot of talks about this very issue, but how much support this idea has in U.S. to bring all these people in United States?
Well, the idea has a lot of support from Iranians because they don't want to see their fellow men and women repeatedly attacked and killed. And the same support comes from bipartisan sympathizers in the United States. I'm talking people on both sides of the aisle, no matter what political affiliation, because these are innocent asylum seekers who gave up their means of protection in exchange for empty U.S. promises. It's the U.S.'s responsibility. But it comes back to two issues again. Other free countries are reluctant to take the residents of Camp Liberty in until the U.S. does, because it was America's mess in the first place. right? And the second is the administration is wary of taking in any of these residents because it may sabotage its efforts to open up talks with Iran. And we discussed this earlier. Iran dislikes the organization that comprises the residents of Camp Liberty. They throw some heavy elbows at the regime's ribs, this is where the conflict is, we have supporters, some very, very luminaries, dignitaries who come out and say this, we need to protect these people, we need to take them out of Camp Liberty and bring them to free countries, namely the United States. But the administration in the United States is reluctant to take them in. So are other nations.
I understand that the PMOI, the Mujahideen, are number one enemy of the Iranian regime, and the regime is terrified of them. But I don't understand why U.S. is so afraid of Mujahideen. What do you think that is?
It's a foreign policy issue. The United States, particularly this administration, but even other administrations, as stated before, wants to open up talks with Iran. They have a lot of hope that Iran will come to talks. The organization represents everything that the Iranian regime doesn't. It's a complete opposite. In fact, the leader is a woman, which is already a slap in the face of a misogynist regime. But for the United States to support this organization means that it jeopardizes or sabotages its efforts to open up talks with Iran. But the organization continues to get intel from inside Iran and leak it out to intelligence agencies around the West. It continues to try to bring about the change in Iran that the Iranian people seek. It continues to promote its democratic values to the rest of the world, and especially in Europe, Canada, Australia, and the United States. And with all of this pressure coming from the opposition from the different parts of the world and its political supporters, there's a lot of reason for the United States to be afraid. There's a heavy hitter on one side and a heavy hitter on the other side. U.S. wants to negotiate with one of the heavy hitters, but the other one's just pulling them down. And it's not just the organization that's pulling it down. You got to think of all the people inside Iran who are under the oppression. These people want change as well. So it's a difficult situation for Obama to be in, and he put himself in that position from his first inaugural speech.
Amir, I know your father was among the 52 who were murdered on September 1st, 2013 by the Iraqi forces in Camp Ashraf. First of all, please accept my condolences. I'm really sorry about that. At the symposium, you talked about the bodies, the 52 bodies being buried in secret. Can you tell us about that, and do you know of the time phrase or where they are buried?
I don't. I live in Southern California, and many of my friends are Marines. They're part of the United States Marine Corps, or they're related to one, And some of them never came back alive from Afghanistan or Iraq, but their bodies did. At the very least, if Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri Al-Maliki had any humanity, he would let my family in Camp Liberty bury my father's body. But the fact that he didn't allow that, the fact that he had all the bodies secretly buried, and we say secretly because we didn't hear about it until after the fact. The reason he buried them secretly is because he's scared of the repercussions. He's already under major international scrutiny, and he was even before this. And he's under scrutiny for allowing or even ordering the attack on the remaining residents of Camp Ashraf, to whom he had given written assurances that they'd be protected while they were there. And again, the residents had been given promises, and again, those promises were broken. People died when promised safety. People were attacked when they were promised security, and people were secretly buried when the world finally acknowledged those broken promises. And really, how many times is my father going to get screwed over? He had a protected person's ID card. He was an asylum seeker. What is that,
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Amir, when was the last time you saw your dad, or maybe you spoke to him? Do you remember?
Yeah. The last time I spoke with my dad was almost a year ago. Yeah. I could tell from his voice that something was different. I just didn't realize that he may be calling just in case he didn't get a chance to say goodbye. But he was a great man.
Oh, I'm sure he was. Amir, were you born in Iran or outside of Iran? Can I
No,
ask?
I was born in Iran, but before I was 1 year old, my parents took me to Camp Ashraf. So the first 4 years of my life, I was in Camp Ashraf. But we went there because we sought refuge. The Iranian regime was after our family, and it continues to be. I have many relatives in Iran who are in prison because of their political beliefs.
So what is the reason of your activism? Is your father the reason for that, or is it something deeper than that?
You know, that's a good question. You know, like I said, dozens of my relatives have been imprisoned, tortured, or executed by the current theocracy in Iran. My father wasn't alone in the fight against the regime. You know, he's joined by my family and thousands, if not millions, of other Iranian revolutionaries. I'm active because of them. You know, I'm active for them. I am active for them.
And what is your hope for them?
My hope is that they succeed in changing this theocracy into a democratic republic. You know, the Iranian people they have a lot of experience with revolutions over the course of the past 100 years, 200 years alone. You know, and when Mossadegh came into power, he was a democratically elected person. So Iranians know what democracy is. It's not like any other nation that you know, hasn't experienced. That are experiencing it for the first time, so it becomes difficult for them to transition into a democracy. Iranians know it. And not only that, there's so many, you know, people travel from Iran and Western worlds. They love it out here. I live in Southern California. There are 1 million Iranians in California alone, so I interact with them on a regular basis. They understand what democracy means. They understand what freedom, equality, suffrage, referendum, they understand these from the core. And so this is what they desire. And I'm not saying this because I'm one-sided and I support democracy and this and that. I mean, who doesn't? But I'm saying it because you see it everywhere. People from inside Iran are risking their lives by getting on Facebook and posting MEK stuff, you know, the Mujahideen stuff.
Which is forbidden,
Exactly, which is forbidden. In fact, it's called Muharib, which basically makes you an enemy of the state. And the state represents God. It can kill you because it has the will of the God to kill, you know, anyone who's against the Vilayat al-Faqih. So it's people who don't support the opposition in Iran. When they do something bad, they're targeted and said, you support the opposition. They'll put that mark on a person just so they can give them an extra 10 years in prison or torture or execution. You know, these are the realities that Iranians in Iran face. They can't stand up for what they believe. And that is the opposite in the United States. And when you see that disparity, when Iranians see that disparity, anybody, not just Iranians, they crave it. They crave freedom.
It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your time and thoughts with us. Good luck with your pursuit of freedom for the Iranian people, especially the Iranian youth. I'm sure you're very big on that area as well.
Yes, of course, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
در خشمگاه موج، در هر فرود و اوج، در حبس و در حصار، در تازیان زار، پیوسته روز و شب فریاد میزنم تا خشت آخرین تو از جای برکنم، تا خشت آخرین تو از جای برکنم. در خشمگاه موج، در هر فرود و اوج، در حبس و در حصار، در تازیان زار، پیوسته روز و شب فریاد میزنم تا خشت آخرین تو از جای برکنم، تا خشت آخرین تو از جای برکنم. بین لحظه لحظه در پیکار تو منم، چیزی برای خصم انکار تو منم. من میبرم تو را از یاد میهنم تا خشت آخرین تو از جای برکنم، تا خشت آخرین تو از جای برکنم. ای ساختار تو از رنج دیگران، ای بافتار تو از نان مردم.